Hello and welcome to Philm Phuckery, the unhinged podcast where I romanticize the villains, ship anything with queer tension, and obsess over films that are either genius or deeply cursed. Sometimes both. I'm your host, Spencer Jones, and this season we're diving headfirst into the chaotic comfort that is the MCU. As usual, we'll be talking about the villain effectiveness, the gay undertones, the logic, the technicalities, and of course the most chaotic moment. So let's get into it. This week, we are talking about Avengers Endgame. It's the moment I've been dreading for so long. I've only seen this movie maybe 4 or 5 times ever because I just simply can't emotionally handle it. It makes me cry every single time. And honestly, there's a sick and twisted part of me that is like, I don't want it to not be emotional. You know what I mean? If I watch it too many times, then it's not as emotional, and I want to be able to cry when Tony Stark dies or when Natasha dies. I just want to be able to feel all of the feelings, so I don't want to get too used to this movie, if that makes sense. And maybe it's just me, but that's how I feel about it. So anyway, this is maybe the 5th time I've ever watched this movie, and yes, I still did cry. It wasn't as emotional for me, only because I just watched it recently. It wasn't as emotional as it could have been, but that is probably for the best because I was watching it with some of my friends and didn't want to be ugly sobbing while like taking notes. Anyway, let's talk about the villains. Obviously, our main villain is still Thanos of this movie because this is a part 2 from Infinity War. But before I talk about Thanos, I want to talk about Nebula. She was a villain. She is trying to better herself, which I have a soft place in my heart for. But in this movie, because they time travel, we get to see the old Nebula, who is still all about getting her father's approval and is still kind of the bad guy. But then we also get to see the new Nebula, who is working with the good guys. She still cares about her father's approval, right? Because that's the small little girl traumatized part of her. It'll probably never go away. But we get to see kind of the two sides of Nebula. Anyway, so speaking of her still wanting her father's approval, in the beginning, right before our timeline, Thanos dies, right before he gets his head cut off, Nebula is like, my father is many things, but he's not a liar. And he's like, thank you, daughter. Maybe I was too harsh. And then he dies. It's kind of nice that Nebula gets that like little instance of him being like, I have some remorse for how I treated you. Not enough for it to be anything even remotely redeeming for him, but I feel like that was really nice for her. But I feel so bad that that's all she gets, like this little tiny scrap of him being like, I might have been a little bit too harsh on you, not like sorry for torturing you your entire life and sorry that you never felt like you were good enough in my eyes. Anything better than nothing, I guess. So I'm glad she got that. But on the other side of that, I feel really bad for past Nebula, because even though she is technically helping Thanos and she's so willing to help him, when her and our timeline Nebula link up, Thanos is still treating her like shit. Like, she is the reason why he is able to gain this information, why he's able to travel forward in time, why he's able to do all of these things. But he still treats her like shit. She just wants to be loved. It's not her fault. She just wants her father's approval. That's all she's ever known. She just wants a sister. I feel so bad for her. Here's the thing though. I do feel really bad for her. Not that bad though, because she is the reason why Natasha died indirectly. She knew that one of them had to die. She knew for a fact, because she knows that the reason Gamora died is because Thanos took Gamora to Vormir so he could kill her to get the Soul Stone. Gamora must have told Nebula what the deal was. She must have been like a soul for a soul, like I figured it out. So Nebula knew, right? Because it was her and Rhodey and Clint and Natasha. They all went back into the same time. And then Clint and Natasha, specifically those two, were sent to Vormir. And Nebula knew what the fuck she was doing. Indirectly, somehow, some way, off screen, suggested, oh, Clint and Natasha would be perfect for this specific mission. Obviously, Thor gets sent to his home to get the ether because he knows the most about it. And I'm assuming Rocket just probably volunteered or whatever. And I guess it makes sense that Tony and Bruce and Steve would go back in time to 2012 when like Avengers was happening. Ant-Man didn't need to be there though. He wasn't there. So like Clint and Natasha could have gone, Ant-Man could have gone to Vormir. But I feel like Nebula was like, no, I think it's a really good idea that Natasha and Clint go, because probably she was like, they have the skills to do it, whatever. She fucking knew, okay? She's on my shit list for that a little bit. I still feel bad for her. It's not her fault for anything that happened up until that point. However, that was her fault. But that's how you get the stones, so I'm not that mad. But like, Natasha was one of my favorite characters in all of the MCU, and I'm still devastated to this day. I was sniffling, trying to like hide from my friends that I was crying this watch. So I just can't forgive her for that a little bit, but whatever. This is just a little thing about Nebula, and I'm back to being a little bit less critical of her. But when her and Rhodey are there trying to get the orb, and she like sticks her hand in the thing and it melts off of her little metal hand, right? to get the orb. And Rhodey is like, I didn't used to be like this either. His legs don't work. So Tony built him a thing to walk. And he's like, I didn't used to always be like this either, but we continue on, or whatever he said. That's really nice, Rhodey. That's a really good sentiment. It's just simply not the same. It's a really sweet and touching moment, but it's like Nebula was taken apart and put back together so many times and like horribly physically abused by her father. It's nice, but it's not the same, Rhodey, thanks. You know, I just thought that was kind of silly. Like, it's a sweet, touching moment, but not the same. And then also, fake as fuck for him for being like, we're the same. I see you as your hand is melting off of your frame. For him to later not even recognize that a different Nebula went back with them. So past Nebula, she takes like the gold plate off of our timeline Nebula's face, right? And puts it on her because she's like, well, now we look similar. But she still has her hands, both hands. And the other Nebula, literally her hands melted off of her frame. And it's just like a little skeleton hand. And no one saw the difference. Fake as fuck. At that point, why even get the gold piece? You know what I mean? Honestly, I'm not looking at Nebula a lot, so I don't know exactly what she looks like most of the time. But I wouldn't have noticed if she had a gold piece or not. So I don't think the Avengers noticed anyway. So it's kind of silly for her to put that on her. But at the same time, a whole ass hand, Rhodey watched it melt off. And then he connected with her about it. He was like, we are the same, you and me. And then no one noticed. Fake as fuck. Anyway, before I move on to Thanos, I just want to talk about how the scene with Steve when he gets in the elevator and he has to tell them Hail Hydra. In retrospect, it's such a cool concept that like they know that they're Hydra now, so he can use that to his advantage in order to get the stones and get on their good side to take the scepter, you know? So I thought that was cool. Anyway, moving on to Thanos, the big bad, the Thanos. So I said it in the Infinity War episode, but I want to reiterate that Thanos is maybe not incorrect. I think he did it wrong, but in this movie, Steve is trying to see the bright side of things. That's what he does. And Natasha's like, please don't tell me to look on the bright side. But he was kind of right. The waters were clearer. He could see more whales getting closer to the docks or whatever he said. I don't know. That sounds like things are getting better. It sounds like, Thanos was maybe right. I don't know. I'm not saying the way he did it was good. And all of the genocide he caused before he even got the stones. I guess it's still genocide when he had the stones. It's just different kind of genocide. People were gone, but they weren't dead. I don't know, whatever. But if the waters were clearer, you know what I mean? I just feel like if he was going to do it right, he could have, and I know I said it before, but I'm going to say it again. He could have either doubled the resources, maybe made the earth bigger so that there could be more water so they could be clear if we're talking about whales still. Or, and this sounds like I'm fucking crazy and horrible person, but if you get rid of half the population and then the population that's still there remembers, then that's what the problem is, right? So wouldn't you just take away half the population and then make sure that the other half doesn't remember? And then they can be grateful that they have all these resources and they don't remember all the people that they've lost. I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm just saying it's better than what he did before. So anyway, past Thanos, he comes back and he's like, I see what I did wrong. Next time when I get all of the stones from you guys, since they're all collected for him now in this one Infinity Glove that they've made, he's like, now what I'll do is I'll reduce the entire universe to an atom and I'll start over. And everyone who builds up from there will be grateful because they won't know what they've lost. And like, sure, true, very good of him, I guess, but that's just so much extra effort. I feel like we're missing the point where you just make everyone forget who they've lost. I feel like that's so much easier. You don't have to start completely over. And then even then, I do see where Thanos is coming from, but eventually you just have to keep going. I understand our timeline Thanos destroyed the Infinity Stones to resist his temptation because beyond what his plan was, he wanted to use them for other things. I guess he doesn't live forever, but I feel like eventually populations build again. You know what I mean? And he'll have to snap half of them away again later. I don't know. I'm getting too much into it. I just feel like Thanos watched his population be overpopulated and then his planet died because there were too many people and not enough resources. And he was being merciful in his eyes. He just did it wrong. That's all, okay? Anyway, so in the crazy scene where Steve can wield Mjolnir and it's like this crazy awesome epic thing and everyone's like, holy shit, he's worthy. And like we low-key knew he was worthy because in Age of Ultron he kind of makes it move a little bit and Thor's like, oh shit. But then Steve, I think, chooses to not lift it up for him to feel better about it. So then in this movie, wow, Steve can wield it, he can summon it to his side. In all of that chaos, right before that, I feel like we're missing the point where Thanos stopped Stormbreaker from going into Thor's hand and was then using it. I don't know if Stormbreaker is a different concept than Mjolnir. Maybe you don't have to be worthy. It's just like he can't summon it to his hand. But he definitely was like holding it and pushing it against Thor and like stopped it from hitting Thor's hand. And we know that with Mjolnir, that doesn't work because the Hulk tried to stop it from flying back to Thor's hand and he got stuck. And so did Pietro in Age of Ultron. because he saw the hammer flying through the air and he tried to stop it and he got taken with it. And I know he's not as strong as the Hulk, but the Hulk and I think Thanos are pretty similar in strength, and maybe Thanos is a little bit stronger. But I do think that Stormbreaker probably has different physics to it where he can still wield it, he just can't summon it to him, is what I'm assuming. Otherwise, I think we need to sit down and have a longer talk about why Thanos is able to use it as a weapon against Thor. You know, I hope this makes sense. Anyway, it came to me this watch. I had never noticed that before, but I was like, why is no one talking about it? I think it just was overshadowed by the fact that, whoa, Steve can wield Mjolnir. That's so cool. Anyway, the last thing I had before moving on, and this isn't really a Thanos being a villain thing, I just thought it was funny. It's the scene where he has just destroyed the Avengers compound and Steve is fighting him and he is getting back up and it's super awesome and super cool. And Thanos is like, everything I have ever done, all of the people that I've killed, whatever, it has never been personal. But your Earth is so annoying. This will be personal. And it's such a dramatic moment, and it's like, oh, this is where he is like actually low-key a villain. He's been a villain the whole time he's been killing people, I get it, but this is where he's like doing it for personal reasons. He's like, this is specifically personal because you guys are annoying. And then it zooms out because it's been panning back and forth, right, between a close-up of Steve and a close-up of Thanos, and then it zooms out and we see both of them and they're so far away, and Thanos is talking at a regular speaking voice. He's not yelling at Steve. Steve is like also really old, right, and he's been in a lot of battles, and I know that in Hawkeye he is losing his hearing because of all of the battles he's been in. So I'd imagine that of all of the explosions, and Steve was like in literal actual war combat and then was frozen and then has been in all of these Avengers type combats, right? So his hearing's probably not great also. And Thanos is speaking at a normal speaking volume. I don't think he heard any of that. I think that's why he was able to get back up and be like, I'm gonna keep fighting. Because I'd be like, huh? What'd you say? I'm sorry, huh? What? Let me get closer. I didn't hear you. Because they're so far away. And I never noticed that, but I was like, my deaf ass couldn't do it. I know Steve can't hear him. Anyway, moving on to the gay undertones. This movie is a lot of drama. Not a whole lot of gay undertones. However, consistently throughout this movie, it's just Steve and Tony forever. I love it. Tony and Pepper are wonderful together. I love them so much. We know this. And they have a daughter named Morgan, and that's so beautiful. But he still has a small place of love in his heart for Steve, and I love it. This movie, though, is kind of like they loved each other. It didn't work out. They went their separate ways, and they've come back together, and they're like, it didn't work out, and we're brooding, and I still love you, but like, it's not going to work out. They're very doomed. And I'm kind of here for it. Anyway, so the scene where Tony has just got back from being in space for, almost a month. And he's very sickly. He was like, I said that we would lose and you said we would do it together. And then guess what? You weren't fucking there. That scene always gets me. He was promised that they would be together and then they weren't together. And he feels hurt and betrayed. And he's like, I tried to warn everybody that we need a suit of armor around the world. You didn't trust me. You were the one against me from the start, basically. It's just so sad. They're so in love, but it didn't work out because they have conflicting views on the world. And Tony feels left and betrayed. And it's so sad. Here's how else I know that Tony's still in love with him, though, because he just carries Captain America's shield in the trunk of his car. He had it in the trunk and he takes it out and a bunch of Morgan's stuff is on top of it, right? So he has to like dump her stuff back into the trunk. A part of me is like, no, he was just covering up the shield from people looking in his car so they wouldn't steal it, or like so it wouldn't get too hot in the sun. I don't know. But in that case, you would just put a blanket over it. But there was like a stuffed animal and some toys and also a blanket on top of it. So I'm like, this man keeps it in his car just in case he runs into Steve and he can give it back to him because they're in love. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like, oh, it's in my garage. Let me put it in my car real quick to like drive to Steve and give it to him. It was like he keeps it in his car for a while. It's been in there for so long that Morgan stuff is on top of it. He has to push the stuff off. You know what I mean? He thinks about him. That's all I'm saying. Speaking of Morgan, though, this has nothing to do with gay undertones, but I want to say it. I was almost named Morgan, and I thank God every day I wasn't. I don't look like a Morgan. No shade to people who are named Morgan, but I just don't look like a Morgan. But I think it's funny because my mom was like, we're thinking about naming her Morgan, and my grandma was like, oh my God, we can call her Morgana. It's so beautiful. My mom was like, oh, hell no. And so they did not pick Morgan. Fun fact, just a little background into my life. Anyway, there's also the scene where I think it's before they're about to go through the time quantum machine thing, and Steve is talking about how they all have to make it home back safely, and he's going on his like whole big Steve Hope speech, whatever, and Tony is like gazing into his eyes, and they just love each other so much. It's the way that they look at each other in that scene. I didn't really go into detail in my notes, so I fear that I don't really exactly remember where in the scene was happening, but I know for a fact that the way that they look at each other is just with so much love in their hearts. And then they've gone back in time. They're in 2012, and Tony is looking at past Captain America, And he's like, that suit did nothing for your ass. Steve is like, why are you looking? Because he loves you. Because he looks at your ass all the time. But like this time he's saying that it looks better now than it did before. You know what I mean? And does Tony not design the suits? So like he designed it to make Steve's ass look better. I'm going to decide that that's canon right now. I feel like he says he makes the suits and that Steve is the leader. Anyway, I've just decided that that's true. So he definitely is designing the suits to make Steve's ass look better, which means he's thinking about it, which means he looks at it all the time. And he feels very comfortable in it enough to point it out that, yeah, your ass looks better than it did before. And Steve's like, why are you looking? And then Scott is like, as far as I'm concerned, that's America's ass, because Scott is also a little bit gay for Steve, and I love it so much. He is always so starstruck by him, which I get because Scott doesn't quite see himself as an Avenger or as a superhero just yet. And he's also really dorky, but he definitely has like a little bit of a tiny gay crush for Steve, and I love it. And then Tony fucks up. He doesn't get the Tesseract, so they have to go back in time yet again. And it's only Tony and Steve on their little personal adventure. There's always, in shows or in movies, the love interests always have to go on this one-on-one personal trip somewhere, or they have to go on this little adventure by themselves. And then, you know, if they had to spend the night, there's probably only one bed and you can't sleep on the floor. It's bad for your back or something like that. They share the bed. You know what I mean? That's what this personal trip was giving. It's their love. I don't know how else to explain it. So then they come back and they snap everybody back, but then Thanos also comes back and then he destroys the Avengers compound, right? Tony immediately goes to find Cap and is so relieved when he's alive because he loves him. That's all I have to say about Tony and Cap, but before I move on, I want to say I'm incredibly gay. The scene where all of the women come together to protect Peter and then also to help each other. Something about it, I go feral at that scene. Anyway, when Peter's like, how are you going to get that all the way over there by yourself? And all of the women come down and they're like, she's not alone. I love when women, I can't with that scene. Girl power for real. It's the best. I love it. And then the last thing before I move on, King Valkyrie. That's it. That's all I want to say. She becomes a king in this, and that's gay in its own thing. And also, Valkyrie's one of the best characters. And now she's a fucking king, the king of Asgard. That's so cool. I appreciate that they made her a king. Like, she's not a queen, she's a king. There's a difference, and it's inherently queer, and I'm obsessed with it. There's a song from my favorite band, Blue October. Hopefully you've heard of it. I know that they're really big, but I also know that people in daily life don't really know who they are, so you know. But there's a song called King, and he's talking about when I have you in my arms, I feel like a king. I used to listen to that song with my ex, and I don't want to talk about that, but I used to listen to that song and be like, I feel like a king sometimes. You know what I mean? That song, low-key, did something to me gender-wise. I was like, I kind of feel like a king sometimes. Like, not a queen, a king. There's a difference, and it's greater, and it's bigger, and it feels inherently queer to me. So anyway, moving on. I know I already said it, but I want to like really harp on the fact that Tony was in space, losing oxygen, eating like dried fruit for almost a month. And that feels like a long time. It does. Maybe it's different because I eat like big meals, but I feel like I have eaten limited food for over a month before and not been as skinny as Tony. And not in like a concerning way, just like it happened sometimes. Let's move past it. Anyway, the point I'm making is that he got real skinny and super sickly, and it's really sad. And I think he had like very, very limited food. But anyway, the point that I want to make is that he was in space for like almost a month with Nebula. And thank God she took care of him and she let him eat all the food, which was really sweet. But thank God that Carol just happened upon their ship in all of the galaxy. She's helping all of these different planets and all of these different people who also were blipped by Thanos. And she just happened upon his spaceship like right on the last day. I know it's for the movie plot purposes, but like that's convenient. Okay. I want to point this out. It's not super unheard of. I think a lot of people already know it, but I just want to make sure that everybody knows it when you watch these movies. In Infinity War, Thor puts Stormbreaker into Thanos' chest and he's like, yes, I killed him, and then it didn't work because Thanos already has a bunch of the stones. And then Thanos pushes him away and then he's like, you should have gone for the head. And so then the next time Thor sees him, he's been plagued by Thanos this whole time and he's been very depressed, and I don't blame him. Not at all. And so he cuts his head off and he's like, I went for the head. Slay your demons, king. And it didn't work. Like, that was the beginning of the movie. So there was a whole other movie for them to deal with. But good for him. You know what I mean? I just want to make sure that everybody knows that continuity between the two movies. So anyway, speaking of Thor and how much I so truly feel bad for him, his whole family, all of the people that he loved, gone before the blip. His mother, dead. Father, dead. Brother, dead. Sister, dead. Not that he was like close with his sister, but that's still his family. You know what I mean? Dead. Jane and him, separated. He lost everyone. And I know that Jane isn't dead. He has no one. Okay. And so then when he is back on Asgard and him and Rocket are trying to get the ether and he is being very depressed and a drunkard and whatever. And Rocket is like, I know you lost people, but I lost people too. And we can bring my people back. So like, help me bring my people back. A valid argument, but let my boy grieve a little bit longer. Like, he's not doing it properly, but people grieve differently, right? He saw his mom for the first time in years after she's been dead. The point is, it was traumatic, and he just saw his mother and he's freaking the fuck out. And Rocket is like, I need you to lock in. Give my boy a second, okay? He has lost and not only just the people, he lost his entire fucking home. He grew up there. He lived there for hundreds of years because he's old as fuck. And he watched his home explode. Are you kidding me? And then all of that happened, and then half of his people got blipped away. My boy needs a moment, okay? He just saw his mom who's dead. I just think we need to have more grace for Fat Thor, okay? And speaking of sad people, Scott, again, has missed out on 5 years of his daughter's life. So he missed out on the years that he was in prison, and then he missed out on a few more years because his ex, I don't know if they were married, but his ex was not letting him have custody. And then he got custody back so he could split it with Cassie, but then he was on house arrest so he could barely see her, do things with her. Then he got blipped for 5 fucking years and she's grown. I feel so bad for Scott because all he wants to do is be a dad. He can't fucking do that. It's such a bummer. And speaking of dads and families and people being blipped, Hawkeye, I feel like his reaction to his family being blipped is 100% correct. Honestly, he's better than me too, because if my whole family was just gone one day and I didn't know why, and then I figured out why, I'm assuming that they talked to him about how Thanos blipped everyone away. But if my whole family was gone, no chance of returning, I would go on a killing spree too. And he's better than me because at least he's killing people of like the criminal underworld. I'd just be killing people off the streets. And for legal purposes, this is a joke, but it's probably not as much of a joke as you would think. So he's a better person than me is the point that I'm making. And I think that his reaction was 100% valid. He lost his whole fucking family. And then he got them back just to lose his best friend. Just to like watch her die, by the way. To watch her probably commit suicide because I'm sure she wanted to for a really long time. She had a very depressing life. And then after he was like prepared to kill himself, ready to die. That's a lot happening emotionally and like physically in your body, probably preparing to like crash to the floor. And then she stops it and then she dies. But he got his family back, right? So that's great. But speaking of him killing people in the criminal underworld, I feel like that point didn't hit in Endgame. The only reason I know that he did that is because of the show Hawkeye, when they're talking about the Ronin and the Tracksuit Mafia and how he was like killing people of the criminal underworld. I just missed that point. All I saw was him killing Asian people. They're tracking him, I guess. And Natasha's like, this isn't where you belong, killing people, whatever. But like, they're bad guys, right? I'm kind of confused. That point was missed on me. So if you haven't seen Hawkeye, that's what was happening there. Bringing it back to Thor real quick, I just want to point out how funny it is when he is drunkenly talking about the ether. Then he goes on the tangent about Jane and how she was his partner or whatever. I don't remember. But he is like a mess and everybody's like, oh God, I'm so embarrassed. What a drunk guy. And Scott is hanging on his every word. I really love that. And maybe it's a gay undertone that I missed. I don't know. But I just think it's so funny how in awe of everybody Scott is. Like, he's so starstruck by all of the Avengers. And I don't blame him. I would be too. But I just really love that they have included that in there. So this goes along with the theory that I brought up in the Avengers Infinity War episode. But the theory is that Doctor Strange, in the movies, he was like, I went through 4 billion instances in which this happens or whatever. I don't remember the number, but there was definitely 4 in there. Anyway, he's like, I have seen so many possibilities of how this ends, and we only win in one. And the theory is that he's fucking lying, or he wanted this one to specifically happen because his definition of winning, I guess, is when Tony Stark dies. So he's killing 2 birds with one stone because he wants to defeat Thanos, and he also wants Tony to die. And now with RDJ being Doctor Doom, I feel like that makes more sense because there's going to be some correlation between Tony Stark and Doctor Doom. Probably there has to be, I think, if you're going to cast RDJ as Doctor Doom. So anyway, there's more evidence for the theory in this movie, I think, is that he gave the stone away on purpose, right? And the Ancient One is like, well, if he gave the stone away on purpose, then he's the best of us, which means that it must have been for some reason that we can't explain. But he knows what he's doing, right? But I just feel like that scene where Bruce is like, well, why would he give away the time stone then? And the Ancient One is like, shit, if he gave it away, we got to trust whatever he was thinking because there must be a reason. Because he's not supposed to give it away in any circumstances. But I feel like the reason he gave it away is so that way Thanos could have it, so that way they would go back in time, so they'd have to go get it. Because he wanted Thanos to win for them to go back for Tony to lose. I hope this makes sense. But I feel like that further tops the theory that he wanted to get rid of Tony. You know what I mean? And there's going to be some sort of correlation between Tony and Doctor Doom. There has to be. Anyway, I just want to point out how many twists and turns this movie has, because it starts with Thanos dying, and then they have to time travel. And then they're like, oh, perfect. There's 3 Infinity Stones in New York in 2012. We'll just get all of them then. And they only have a certain number of Pym particles because Dr. Pym was blipped. And then, oh fuck, Tony messed up. So now they have to go back in time again and hope that they can get Pym particles and hope that they can get the Tesseract. And he's roughly estimating the time. And then they come back, they have all the stones, and it's perfect, even though Natasha died. And then Hulk snaps and his body is burned, but then everybody comes back and we hear the birds chirping. And Clint gets a call from Laura, and it's so serene. And we're like, oh my God, they did it. And then past Thanos just goes fucking crazy on Avengers compound. They look like they're going to lose because it's only the people that were at the Avengers compound. And we're like, oh shit, it's just Steve against Thanos right now. And Steve is already taking a hit and he's got to like cinch up his arm and he's bleeding out of his mouth. And he gets back up because that's what he does. But then everybody comes through the portals and it's all of the superheroes ever in the history of the MCU. There's just so much happening. Then Tony dies and it's really devastating and it's just such an awful moment for everybody. There's just so many twists and turns. There's not a single moment in this movie that I would take away. It needed to be 3 hours. They knew what they were doing and absolute cinema. It's perfect. Anyway, speaking of Hank Pym, this is so unimportant, but I wanted to say when they go back in time to young Hank Pym to get more Pym particles and also the Tesseract in 1970 or something like that, on the door, it says Henry Pym. I didn't know that Hank was short for Henry. I don't know if anybody does. It feels like an old person name, respectfully. So I feel like it's normal for me to not know that Hank is short for Henry. I don't know any Hanks or Henrys. So anyway, that was wild. His government is Henry Pym, but they just call him Hank. That's it. But speaking of when they go back in time, I'm really glad that Tony was able to say thank you to his dad, even though he didn't know it was him. That just feels very cathartic for Tony. And he died so soon after that at least he got this one moment with his dad where he was allowed to not be a little, because he was kind of like a teenager when his dad died, right? So he was as much of a dick that Tony Stark is, more of a dick with the teenage hormones because men are assholes when they're teenagers. So he got to thank his dad and not be a dick to him. It's really nice for him to have right before he fucking dies. Anyway, so Natasha also dies. My 2 favorite characters, unfortunately. 2 of my favorite characters. I have more, but like, whatever. The scene where they're all on the dock, I think it's by Tony's house, I'm imagining it. There's a lake. Maybe it's by the Avengers compound. I don't know. And Bruce is so angry that she's dead and he like throws the bench across the lake. He's strong. What a cool display of anger and frustration at the moment that Natasha is dead, you know what I mean? But then he just starts talking normal with no anger or emotion in his voice. I don't remember what he says, but he's like, no, we have to do this thing, whatever. Like he didn't just throw a bench across a lake. What do you mean? I just feel like that scene is so unnecessary. Quit throwing benches, you know what I mean? And then later on when Tony dies, I feel like it's the same dock and now Pepper's got to squat next to Morgan because there's no fucking bench to watch her float away Tony Stark's heart. I appreciate the continuity of there not being a bench, but like unnecessary. Don't throw benches. Here's a logical question that I have. So when the Hulk snapped his fingers and the birds came back and Laura called Clint, we know that the snap worked, right? It brought half of everyone back. So then the Avengers compound gets blown to shit by past Thanos. My question is, when they snapped everyone back, was there anyone else in the Avengers compound? Or when they got blipped, no one was there because they were all at Wakanda? Like all of them were at Wakanda? I don't remember seeing S.H.I.E.L.D. agents there. I guess there's no S.H.I.E.L.D. agents anymore because of Hydra. But I feel like when they were first building the Avengers compound, there were people that were training and they were just like extras, right? And then Steve was like, no, I feel at home here because there were people marching or whatever. So where did those people go? Did they get crushed by the building when it collapsed? Because it was just all of the superhero people that were fighting later on. So I guess I'm just confused by that aspect of it. And then also, thank God and how convenient, I know it's for movie purposes, but none of them got crushed by the building that collapsed on top of them. Scott was right up on the impact and thank God he shrunk. But how did he know to shrink? I don't know. It's just a lot of conveniences, I suppose. I know that's how movies work, but I also just want to point out how sad they make me feel for Rocket all the time. Even before Guardians of the Galaxy 3, which I'll get there when I get there, but in this movie, when he's being crushed by the building, he's like, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And then he's like, oh my God, we're going to drown. It's so sad. Stop. Don't make me feel bad for him. He's supposed to be funny. Anyway, at this moment in time is when I get to talk about Mommy Wanda. So I know that I said that she was the strongest character, and I believe that still to this day. It hasn't been that long since I said it, so I stand by it. And here's why, okay? She comes down and she's like, you took everything from me. And he's like, I don't even know who you are. And she said, you will. Single-handedly is taking down Thanos by herself. No one is helping her. And she's barely breaking a sweat. She's not panting. She's not sprinting or anything. And that's not even the peak of her powers yet. She doesn't even know what she can do. That's just out of like emotion, right? This is before WandaVision, before she comes into her powers as a Scarlet Witch, single-handedly beating Thanos' ass. So much so that he is scared. And then he calls for them to rain fire on everything, the whole fucking battlefield. They're like, but we have troops down there. He said, I don't give a fuck. Rain fire. Because he was scared. He was scared of what Wanda could do. And I know that people are going to say, okay, but they stopped fire. Literally all of their cannon power went towards Carol when she entered the atmosphere. And cool, that's great. But that's because Wanda had stopped because he was firing on everything, right? And I think, okay, so let's say that Wanda is 100% being the strongest character ever. I think that Carol Danvers is 99.99999% strong. And here's the only difference. Wanda was never knocked down once by Thanos. The only time she was in Infinity War, and that's because she was grieving her boyfriend, guy, Vision. And she was, not prepared for Thanos to smack her aside. But in this one, Carol gets smacked aside, and Wanda was taking him on single-handedly. Like, Carol couldn't do that. She gets back up pretty quickly. Good for her. But I'm just saying, Wanda would never. Okay, so Wanda's at 100%, Carol's at 99.999%, and I stand by that. Speaking of Wanda, I do really appreciate that they continued on with Wanda and Clint's little relationship that they have. It was very subtle, but it was in a very isolated scene with just them, and they were talking about how they lost Natasha and they lost Vision, and Wanda's like, I know that they know that we won. I feel it, She's like, I have to trust that they know that we won. Because Wanda has grown up now, and she is definitely, obviously still younger than Clint, but she's not a teenager anymore when they first met. I would explain him as like an uncle, I think, to her. Just like emotionally. I don't know. But I like that they're both comforting each other in this very unfortunate time. And I think that Wanda was also very close to Nat. They just didn't show it on screen, which I wish that they would have. Like, we need more female friendships in these movies. But I think that Clint was able to be like, I really miss her. And Wanda's like, I really miss her too. And I also miss Vision. And Clint's like, I know you miss Vision. I'm so sorry. And I like that they kept that scene in there. It being a 3-hour movie, they didn't have to, but I like that they still had that moment together. I think that it's really beautiful that they continued on that relationship that they both have. I'm kind of bummed, though, that in both of them having their own shows, neither of them were mentioned. Like, I understand that they have bigger priorities than each other, but I think with how close that they're showing us that they've been, I'm kind of bummed that not a single mention of Clint in WandaVision and not a single mention of Wanda and Hawkeye. I know that that's not what those shows are about, but like, not one mention. I just don't believe it. I think that they think about each other sometimes, and I think that's really sweet. So I know that in Infinity War, I was talking about how Thanos is all for the dramatics. And we know that Tony is also all for the dramatics, because when he was like, where would a big showboat like Loki go to? And he's like, oh my God, Stark Towers, because it literally has my name on it. So we know that he is all for the dramatics as well. And I believe in his final act, right before he died, when he snapped his fingers, he made sure that they all blipped the same way as Thanos, so he would feel what they all felt. And he wanted it to be quick enough that nobody got hurt, but slow enough for the people up further in the sky so Thanos could be like, oh shit, this is happening. And he made sure that Thanos was able to sit in his regret for long enough before he was blipped too, because Thanos was blipped so much later than everyone else. He really wanted Thanos to sit in his loss and dwell in it for a little bit and be like, I fucked up and they won. Shit. And then slowly he fades away. I love that Tony did that. Here's the last logic hole that I have. I don't know it's a logic hole, but I don't believe it. And I know that I talked about it a little bit before, but you're telling me Steve being so in love with Bucky. I don't know that he ever moved on from Peggy, but he's living this new life. And I know that he doesn't really feel like he belongs, but now he's with Bucky and he's got Steve and he's got all of his friends and he's just reunited. Oh no, Tony died. Damn, how did I forget? That was really embarrassing. But anyway, he's got all these people, right? And he's got his Avengers and he's at the Avengers compound. And I know he's never felt like he's fit in. He feels better in the military aspect of whatever. But you're telling me the love of his life, Bucky Barnes, who also probably doesn't feel like he fit in because they're from the same time, and Bucky was a Winter Soldier and he's got shit going on mentally. You're telling me he left the love of his life, Bucky Barnes, for Peggy Carter? No, I feel like he maybe could visit because Hank got blipped back, right? Everyone's back to normal. So Hank can make more Pym particles and he could have visited Peggy. He could have been like, can I have one more particle to visit Peggy and then come back? I just don't believe that he would have left Bucky like that. Ain't no fucking way. It just feels like really lazy writing for them to be like, Chris Evans is getting older, so let's make him go back in time for Peggy, and then now he's really, really, really old. And then when Sam is like, do you want to tell me about her? And he goes, no, I don't think I will. That's a cool line, I guess. What a great last thing to say before you die. But what the fuck? You don't want to tell your best friend about this girl that you left all of them for. It's so lazy. And I also feel like low-key, maybe he's ashamed because they got divorced. Maybe he's like, I left you guys for this lady who like we didn't even stay together. And maybe that's why he wasn't on Peggy's side table when he was visiting her. There's no pictures of him, just her kids. I don't know. I just have so many questions. I feel like the Steve that I know who's in love with James Buchanan Barnes, Buckaroo, he's not going back for Peggy. Maybe he'll visit her and he's like, I miss you. But he's moved on. She's died in his timeline. And he's going to go back and leave Bucky by himself to not feel comfortable. At least they both were people outside of their time who knows where they came from and what they've been through and whatever. They were so close to each other. He would not have just up and left him. Poor writing. Anyway, moving on. The technicalities. So the first one I have to talk about is when Thor is with Carol Danvers and he is right next to her face and he summons Stormbreaker and her hair flies and she is not backing down at all and she stares him down and he's like, I like her. And they kind of give each other a nod. It's so sweet and it's such a cute way of kind of introducing the next steps of Marvel. I think that's how I see it, is he's like, okay, I trust you to like pass on the legacy of Marvel as a character for her to continue on what they're doing. Because this is an end to the original 6 Avengers, basically. Tony's dead. Natasha's dead. Steve is old and dead, basically. And we still see more of Bruce and Thor and whatever. But, you know, it's the continuation of Marvel from characters we haven't met yet and from characters that we don't know too well. There's going to be more of them. You know what I mean? I hope that makes sense. But anyway, it's such a cute way of introducing her into the MCU and being like, yes, you're good, you can continue on, I trust you to carry on this legacy that we have. You know what I mean? Anyway, this was a cool thing that I didn't know until this watch. When Steve is in that group therapy setting and they're talking about the blip and how they have to move on from it, the guy who was talking about going on a date, I was like, he kind of looks familiar. I wonder who that guy is. I looked him up. He's one of the Russo brothers. If you don't know who that is, the Russo brothers are the directors of not only this movie, but also Infinity War. And they also did Winter Soldier and Civil War. So Joe Russo is that guy. That was really cute. I also wanted to bring up, and I guess I could have brought it up in the gay undertones, but it's not really an undertone. It's very overtone, very explicitly said, but also it's an undertone in that they don't make a big deal out of it, which I really loved. The point that I'm making, I was going to talk about it on its own before I realized it was Joe Russo. Not only that, but I love that he was the one who'd do it. Let me just get to my point. He's talking about how he went on a date with this guy and he cried before the something was served and then he cried at dessert, whatever. So subtly, they're gay. A man going on a date with a man. I love to see it. But no one said anything about it. It was so normal. They were like, yes, you went on a date, period. The end. Doesn't matter what the gender of the person that you went on a date with was. And he was so comfortable with using he, him pronouns for the date that he went on as a man. I love it. And Steve didn't say anything about it either because he loves men too. I love it when people can be gay without it being the focal point of the plot. You know what I mean? He went on a date. That's the point. It just happened to be that he, as a man, went on a date with another man. And I love it. It's so good. Beautiful. This was also really cool that I just found out is that the person who plays Hawkeye's daughter is Joe Russo's daughter. So the guy who was in the group therapy setting, his daughter plays Hawkeye's daughter. That's cute. A little Nepo baby. She's not that bad at acting. It's fine. But that was really sweet, I think, to include her in that. And then she was in the Hawkeye show later. So it's like they didn't change it up. I like it. And so this has nothing to do with anything, but since we're talking about actors, the scene where Scott comes back and he's got his little wagon and he's walking down the street and this kid rides down the street with his bike. Scott is like, what happened here? And the kid is crying and he like sniffles and rides away. That is the guy from Scream 6. He's like the brother of the guy who died. And so he is one of the, spoiler alert, this came out a while ago, this movie. But he's one of the Ghostface. Which is unimportant, but I've watched that movie a lot. So I was like, I know this person. Like, where is he from? He was in that movie. It's a very peak movie, in my opinion. I really like Jenna Ortega. And it's unimportant at all, but I just wanted to point it out for people who watch Marvel and also like Scream. There's got to be more overlap than just me. Okay, anyway. Another unimportant thing, talking about actors, Bullet Train is a movie that I've watched a lot. I really like a lot of movies. I like a lot of shitty movies. I'll admit to it. Bullet Train is one of the peak movies. Literally no notes. I would not change a single thing about that movie. I have a lot of beef with Joey King as a person. Not that she's done anything wrong, just like her face and the person that she is. I have beef with her personally. I'm not the only one either, but anyway, I can't get into that right now. I'm going to just be talking about it for a long time. But anyway, even her being in the movie. The point is I wouldn't change it. Like, she's supposed to be annoying. You know what I mean? So anyway, peak movie. I watched it a lot. The point that I'm making is that the guy that Hawkeye kills in the rain when he's being the Ronin and Natasha walks up behind him, the last guy that he kills, it's like a big scene. They're talking to each other. He was in Bullet Train. It's not important, but I wanted to bring it up anyway because, again, there's got to be more overlap than me of people who watch Marvel and Bullet Train a lot. That's it. The CGI of this movie, so good, and I have one qualm. But here's what's really, really good, and I just noticed it. I mean, most of the CGI is really fucking good because most of the movie is CGI. Like, there was not a second that went by that I didn't think to myself, Thanos is not a real thing. There was not a second that went by that I was like, those aliens are not real. They did really good. There wasn't like something a little bit off about this here, and it took me out of the movie. You know what I mean? Except for Rocket. Something about his eyes in this movie, I think, did it for me. And I was like, that's CGI. That's not a real raccoon talking to me right now. And I don't know what they did differently. I think it has something to do with his eyes, but it could be something different. But I just feel like he looked better in a lot of the other movies. And this movie specifically, something was off and it took me a little bit out of it. But specifically, one of the best things in this, I like really honed into the fact that, holy shit, that's not a real character. The Hulk, Smart Hulk specifically, I guess, when he is talking to the Ancient One and she astral projects him out of his body, whatever, and his body hits the floor. The jiggle physics, beautiful. What an art form. AI could never. That moment, in the other direction, I was like, wait, that's not a real person. But the jiggle physics were so good that I had to remind myself that it wasn't a real person. You know what I mean? So like on the other end of the spectrum. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, before I move on, I just want to say that the signatures at the end with all of the original 6 Avengers, what a nice touch. It makes me cry every time because they're like signing off. You know what I mean? And we see them later in other things, but it just is like the ending of such a big and beautiful thing that we all were a part of. And they're saying goodbye. I don't know. It makes me emotional. Anyway, moving on to the most chaotic moment. Speaking of emotional, I don't know that it's the most chaotic moment, but it's the biggest, most impactful moment when Tony Stark dies. I have not watched this movie and not cried at Tony Stark dying, and it's so rude of them to do this. So I'm gonna go back just a little bit before Tony sees Spider-Man when he comes back, and they have a hug with each other, and it's very nice and it's very sweet. And Peter is talking about how they were gone for 5 years, and Doctor Strange was like, we've been gone for 5 years, they need us. God, that part got me. So they have this moment, but Tony has gone this whole time thinking he has failed Peter. He hasn't seen him in 5 years. That was their only moment together. And then Tony is dying after snapping his fingers because he is Iron Man. And Peter Parker is like, Mr. Stark, we won. We did it. And then he's apologizing, which is so sad. And then he doesn't want to leave his side, but Pepper is like, please, like, let me say goodbye to my husband. So sad. I wish that everybody could have said goodbye to him. It's not fair, but those are the two important people, I guess. Like, I get it. And then Pepper is talking to Tony, and he is kind of fading in and out of consciousness, probably. And he's trying to lock in on Pepper. And she's promising him that her and Morgan are going to be okay. And that I think what she really was promising is that everyone was going to be okay, the Avengers and her and Morgan. And she says he can rest. And earlier in the movie, when he is talking about how he figured out the time travel, but he's not going to help them because he is happy with his life. And she's like, but will you be able to rest if you don't help them? And then when he's dying, she says, it's okay, you can rest. Don't talk to me. I can't handle this. It's so sad. Why would they do this to us? And then I've heard so many people talk about how Peter has really heightened senses and that he knew the exact moment that Tony's heart stopped beating. And that's really rude. And I'm not going to cry right now, but I might be. Don't talk to me. And then it pans to everyone who is watching him die, and they're all really sad, but Steve is so extra sad because he loves him too. He didn't even get to say goodbye properly. That's the most impactful scene, and even thinking about it, I'm getting emotional, so I'm gonna not try to think about it too much before I start crying. But wonderful performances by everyone. I can't believe they killed one of my favorite characters. What a beautiful movie. It had to be 3 hours, and anyone who disagrees, what are you talking about? So anyway, that's all I have. If you enjoyed what you were listening to, I am on Instagram and TikTok as PHILM And if you're listening on Spotify or watching on YouTube, just know that this podcast exists on both as Philm Phuckery with a PH for both. And if you are enjoying what you're listening to, I would love it if you could interact in any kind of way, like, comment, subscribe, share, download, rate, all the things. I still haven't decided, unfortunately, what I'm going to do for next season. I don't know if I'm going to continue with Marvel for season 2 or if I'm going to move on to some other kind of movies. So we'll see. If you have any ideas, let me know. I suppose I will see you next year. Just kidding. I'll see you in a minute. If you don't get it, go watch Avengers Endgame. Okay, love you. Bye.